Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. The success of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders in the current presidential primary elections is one of the most extraordinary cultural phenomena of your lifetime and mine. In chemistry, you have the phenomena of a supersaturated solution. You take an entire canister of Morton salt, you dump it into a big glass of water, you stir it until finally the water is clear. There's no sign of the salt left whatsoever. It looks like perfectly normal water. Then what do? You take the teeniest, weeniest little crystal of salt you can find and you drop it into the glass. And suddenly, all of that salt that's invisibly hidden in the water, that's aching for a sense of collective identity, of group identity, whomps together around that tiny little crystal, and you end up with an enormous crystal of salt in your glass. In the same way that a seed crystal rapidly grows huge, Trump and Sanders have been gaining heft and momentum. Their followings have been growing substantial. But why? Because, like the supersaturated glass of water, in which nothing was visible but water itself, we are pregnant with something that we cannot clearly see. We are supersaturated with emotions and ideas that Trump and Bernie somehow, like that tiny little crystal of salt, crystallize. We are that rough beast that Yeats, the poet, talked about, slouching toward Bethlehem, waiting to be born. But the Trump and Bernie success is not just a result of our supersaturation. There is something unique about these two men. How do we know? Democratic crowds haven't cohered around Hillary Clinton the way that they've cohered around Bernie. Hillary claims to have just passed 1 million donations, but Bernie has attracted closer to 5 million donations. That's astonishing. On the Republican side, Trump has had competition, lots of it. Remember Chris Christie, Marco Rubio, and Jeb Bush? How many people cohered around them? Not many. And it isn't money that accounts for the kind of popularity that we're talking about. If it were money, the man who had the biggest amount of money to spend was Jeb Bush, and he's gone. He's out of the picture. Why was he a washout? He did not express the mass emotions of his time. He didn't grab hold of that invisible something inside of you and me, waiting for a voice. So what makes Trump and Sanders so special? They are champions. What's a champion? It's a person who represents our group. It's a person who shows us that we are, in fact, not just loners with crazy, bizarre ideas. It's a person who shows us that we are a movement, we are a force, we are a power to be reckoned with. Now look, I worked for 17 years in the music industry, helping build stars. And that's what the superstars I worked with in the music industry were. They were champions. They were champions who represented a subculture's ache for identity. They were champions who spoke for a group that was only discovering its existence, a group that was hungry for a way to express itself, a group hungry for collective heft, for collective might. In 1979, Joan Jett spoke for girls who wanted power, a power that had belonged up till then exclusively only to men. Joan went on stage with the male symbol of control, that phallic symbol, the guitar, and she used that guitar as a power tool. She ate that stage alive. She showed that girls can have real, gut-level, muscular power. ZZ Top, another one of my bands, championed Texas culture, a culture most Americans didn't even know existed. ZZ Top went out on tour with a 75-foot stage, the shape of the state of Texas, 4 trailer trucks painted with a mural of the Texas landscape, a bison, a longhorn steer, 2 turkey vultures, 3 rattlesnakes, and a set that showed the Texas prairie at sunrise, midday, and dusk. Plus, they took me into the office of the mayor of Houston and had me named the ambassador of Texas culture to the world. They were trying to give voice to a culture that felt stomped on, repressed, invisible. Prince and Michael Jackson, two more of my clients, spoke for a culture that wanted to be multiracial, that wanted to erase our old color lines. The country music stars I worked with championed the right of the South to be taken seriously beyond the ghetto of the Bible Belt. And Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, another one of my bands, plus the whole rap movement, which I was working with, represented the identity of not just inner-city kids from places like the South Bronx, but of suburban kids who found the rap attitude liberating. In history, a champion could determine life or death, the life or death of a group. In the Iliad, Achilles was the champion of the Greeks. Hector was the champion of the Trojans. When Hector threw a spear and missed Achilles, he knew it was all over for him. And when Achilles killed him, Troy was destroyed utterly. Its men and children were murdered, and its women were taken as sex slaves. That's how powerfully a champion sums up the soul and sometimes the very destiny of a group. One more trick here. Groups define themselves with an unfortunate trick. They gain their coherence by picking an enemy. In Mao's China in the days of the Cultural Revolution of 1966, gangs of kids inspired by Mao were shaming or killing adults that Mao disapproved of. The official enemies were insiders. They were people with money and anyone who might be anti-Mao. As Gao Wan, a student who lived through the Cultural Revolution, sums up the enemies list, the bad guys were, and I'm quoting him, bourgeois revisionists, capitalist rotters, filthy rich peasants, and son-of-a-bitch landlords, blood-sucking capitalists, and neo-bourgeoisie, historical counter-revolutionaries and active counter-revolutionaries, rightists and ultra-rightists, alien class elements and degenerate elements, reactionaries and opportunists, counter-revolutionary revisionists, imperialist running dogs, and spies. What do these people have in common? All of these enemies were folks who lived not very far from you. To repeat, they were insiders. But when Deng Xiaoping made getting rich China's new goal in 1980, the list of villains had to change. If people who made money were going to be the new good guys, there had to be new bad guys. So what did China do? It switched villains. Now the bad guys were foreigners, not insiders, outsiders. As Evan Osnos puts it in his book, The Age of Ambition, quote, the new approach emphasized the 19th and 20th centuries' century of national humiliation, an arc of events extending from China's defeat in the Opium Wars of the mid-19th century to the Japanese occupation of Chinese soil during World War II, roughly from 1850 to 1950. The new enemies were the Japanese, the British, and the Germans, the folks who had once carved up China like a melon. The new enemies were outsiders, but you needed an enemy to establish the coherence and identity of the group, of China itself. Switch enemies, and you can switch policy. Switch enemies, and you can switch the focus and the soul of a group. What does this have to do with the success of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump? Like the Chinese, Bernie and Trump have given us a sense of group identity by offering us new villains. Trump has picked external villains, outsiders, Mexican immigrants, and Muslim jihadists. And Bernie has picked insiders, folks a convenient drive away. Bernie targets bankers and what he calls the billionaire class. But the bottom line is that Bernie and Trump are defying all the odds, and they are defying the pundits, because something remarkable is happening. And it's not something that's remarkable that's happening to them, it's something remarkable that's happening to us. We are cells in two new superorganisms struggling for life, two new groups gasping to take their first breaths. Bernie and Donald point to the new heroes and villains we are groping toward, not to mention the new soul we are trying to have a voice for. The new heroes and villains we are groping toward while we find out something strange, who we are as individuals, who we are as a group, and what we are struggling to become. Yes, thanks to Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, a strange beast is slouching toward Bethlehem to be born. And that beast is inside of you and me. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now, for that infamously sneaky, sleazy, seditious, slimy, impossible to find little tiny off button, I think I've got my finger on it.